Hey everybody, welcome to a very, very special Friday Frontliner on a Mighty Blaze. We are live streaming on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube as usual. We are here every week with the freshest, biggest authors on Friday Frontliner, and we're so happy to see everybody here and welcome everybody back. A real quick few words about a Mighty Blaze before we get to our fantabulous guest, Rebecca Makkai. A Mighty Blaze is an all-volunteer initiative to help writers reach readers virtually during COVID and beyond. And today, 3/10/2023 is the third anniversary of the founding of A Mighty Blaze, which I think we started it like within the week that basically the whole world came apart 3 years ago with COVID, and all our friends had their book tours canceled, and so we just banded together and started to put writers online. And 3 years later, it has been a smashing success, and we feel very grateful for all the fans who have been there and for all the people who've worked with A Mighty Blaze over the last 3 years. It has been quite a trip. So at A Mighty Blaze, we are never, ever asking for your money. If you want to support us or show the love, just give us a like, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, everything. But if you want to spend money, please spend it on fabulous books like I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. This is one of the hottest, freshest books out there right now, and I'll get to that more in a moment. We're going to put some links in the chat. We have a partnership with bookshop.org, and if you want to buy Rebecca's book, please buy it through the link provided there to help support independent bookstores. And with that, and if you want to ask Rebecca a question at any time, just put it in the chat. I will get to it sort of towards the end of the interview, but just put your question in the chat and I will see it. So on to our guest today. Rebecca Makkai is the Chicago-based author of the novels The Great Believers, The 100-Year House, The Borrower, as well as the short story collection Music for Wartime. The Great Believers was, of course, a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. It received the ALA Carnegie Medal and the LA Times Book Prize, among other honors. Makkai is on the MFA faculties of Sierra Nevada College and Northwestern University. She is also the artistic director of Story Studio in Chicago. Her work has been translated into no less than 20 languages. And her latest, I Have Some Questions for You, is a book that People called a twisty, immersive whodunit, perfect for fans of Donna Tartt's The Secret History. The New York Times called it Spellbinding. The Boston Globe called it an irresistible page-turner. And this is my favorite. NPR said it was both a thickly plotted, character-driven mystery and a stylishly self-aware novel of ideas. Oh my God. Like, I would love for a book I wrote one day to be described that way. That just sounds perfect. The book is already a New York Times bestseller. And so, Rebecca, thank you for making time for us and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So my first question for you is slightly off topic, but it is the classic, how do you do it all? I mean, and so what I mean by that, Rebecca, is you were like all over Twitter every day, and the content is like legitimately funny. And then you teach at like 3 different schools, and you write these award-winning books, and you have a Substack, and you're doing this reading project, 84 books. It's just, do you feel busy? Do you feel really busy? You seem busy.
Yeah, no, I'm crazy busy. And I feel like my inbox is the thing where I'm like, oh my God, people must hate me. Like, I'm just not even answering. Like, people be like, I really, could you blur my book? And I'm like, it just goes by so fast. And then sometimes I'm not even answering. And I'm like, oh God. But, I just, there's a lot of stuff I just don't get done, but it's not the part that you see, right? I do have ADHD. And so I think that part of this is, sorry, for anyone listening later, that was me manically moving my hands around. But part of this, it's like wanting to be everywhere, wanting to do anything, having a lot of energy. I'm great at like lounging around too. That happens.
Maybe you're not writing right now, and maybe that's the thing. And sort of like when I'm like in a writing mode or really any kind of mode, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to stop and do Twitter. But I just sort of imagine your life is like Twitter for 2 minutes here, write a great sentence there, teach something here. I mean, I don't know. It seems like you have a lot of different gears that you're shifting back and forth on.
That's ADHD partly. Yeah, it really is. It's like I have, I'm often, thinking about 17 things at once, and that can be that can be really problematic. Just like, narrowing my focus to one thing. But it's also like I'm kind of used to mental chaos. And so when my outer life matches that, I'm okay with it, if that makes sense.
It does, which is a nice pivot into how not chaotic and how controlled your writing seems. I mean, this book is like, it's tremendous. It's terrific. Everybody says so. I'm in the majority opinion on this. And I think a lot of what is said about this book is just how masterfully it's woven together. And so it just seems complete. I mean, maybe this is just a place in your life where you just feel like you have clear vision and total control. But I mean, I was just so impressed with how controlled this book was. And I just want to turn it back over to you in a second to just describe what the book was. But I mean, two books that this really reminded me of that I just love. Two of my favorite books of the last 3 years or so were Trust Exercise by Susan Choi and The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. And those books just totally blew me out of the water, just like this one. But before I go crazy raving about this book, just tell us in your own words, like, what is this book about?
Okay. So it is, as you said, it's called I Have Some Questions for You. We have a 40-year-old protagonist. She's 40 in 2018. And she is invited to return for 2 weeks in the dead of winter to the New Hampshire boarding school that she had attended as a scholarship fish out of water kid from Indiana. And she goes back. She's a successful film historian. And she has a podcast about women in Hollywood. She goes back and she teaches two classes, two 2-week classes. One is on film history and one is on podcasting. And while she's back, her mind is pretty naturally back on the mid-90s when she graduated, and specifically on the death their senior year of a young woman named Thalia Keith. Thalia and Bodhi had been roommates the year before, but they weren't really friends. And Thalia was found drowned in the campus swimming pool, but with significant injuries to her body. Very quickly, a young Black man named Omar Evans, who was an athletic trainer at the school, was arrested. There was what seemed like a mountain of evidence, and he also confessed to the crime. And he's been in prison since then. A lot of people online feel that he is innocent. One of Bodhi's podcasting students decides that her project is going to be to look into the olden days of 1995 and explore this. And this young woman is actually also convinced of Omar's innocence. And pretty quickly, Bodhi, my narrator, starts to realize that there are some major unanswered questions. And we go from there.
Amazing. Yeah, it plugs into, I think there's something of a trend now of the amateur sleuth, right? I mean, this is sort of, first there's things like Serial, which was such a phenomenon, a pop culture phenomenon, but that was more not so amateur. It's kind of more like just straightforward investigative reporting. But now, you have, there was a great show a few years ago called Don't Fuck with Cats, about amateur sleuthing. And then, of course, now you have Only Murders in the Building, just to name a few examples. So now people are like, it's not just amateur sleuthing. People are making art and stories about amateur sleuthing. And, here is your book, which is, sort of about that. But it's at least kind of like getting into this phenomenon of how everybody's a detective, everybody's an investigative reporter now. I'm just kind of
curious. For better or worse, and often
for
worse.
So that was my question. Like, is it for better or worse?
Mm-hmm. Well, and the book doesn't come down with a thesis statement on that, right? But, there's, the true crime obsession is nothing new. People have always been interested in this kind of thing. And people have always, tried to, get in there and solve things themselves. What's different in the modern era is people can just spend all day looking at documents online, and they can see photos, and you can spend all weekend looking into a case. And there's actually some real good that has come out of that, like people identifying Jane Does, or, gathering information that the investigators didn't have at the time, or that cases that really have gotten overlooked or sidelined, and people kind of adopt. And then also Innocence Project work, which often, think about like the freeing of the West Memphis 3. That was something that, started online. But also you get like, in England, just a few weeks ago, there was this woman who went missing. It seems like she fell into a river is what happened. But people got obsessed with it, and they're tromping all over the place where she went missing, and they're destroying any evidence. And they're like, just making an absolute mess of things, horrifying to the victim's family. And just, so it's all of that. And with this book too, there's, you have a pretty character who's like a pretty skeezy guy on YouTube who's kind of obsessed in a very gross way with this case. But you also have people actually working things out and realizing that, they might not have thought they had useful information at the time, but they might have a little piece of information that is useful. So the book is doing both, just like real life does both.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, I know I've heard you talk about how as a genre, true crime, or at least the manifestation of kind of true crime obsessions and amateur sleuthing that we see here, it's problematic in the sense that it, fetishizes and creates entertainment out of people's suffering. And I just, there is a passage in your book that your book starts off. This is a passage that everybody talks about. It's very, very good, of course, but like literally almost every review quotes this passage. Is it the one about the girl stabbed in the cab, the one where she was kept in the basement, the one where this, the one where that, and there's all these, the one where with this dead girl victim. And the thing that struck me about that passage was that it almost had the same kind of form as people talking about jokes. Like, oh, have you ever heard of the one about the rabbi and the priest, or the one about Obama and Trump in a plane, and the one this, the one that? And the obvious comment to make about that is that both of these, I'm like setting up a kind of, you're about to be entertained when I tell you the one about, but in one case it's a joke, and in one case it's a real life dead person. And anyway, I just thought that it spoke to the entertainment value that people kind of sickly take out of these things.
Yeah, right. And the way that certain cases become sort of like, feel like public property. I've done a lot of, I already was already sometimes listening to true crime podcasts, but then really for this book, was getting into just, kind of doing it for research. And one of the weird things that I find in some of them is like the host, especially if it's like a deep dive, like multiple episodes about the same thing, the host feels like they need to justify the whole time why it's their case. Like, I've been obsessed with this for 12 years. I did this. I found this tiny piece of information. I really relate. Like, great, but that does not mean that you own it, and it does not mean that you knew these people.
But like they are a part, they're inserting themselves. Like they are a part now of this unfolding story themselves.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And so in this case, within the book, Bodhi, she sees people doing that, and then actually does realize when she's back there that she does probably have useful information, but does not want to be that person, does not want to be seen as that person inserting herself, especially because she sets foot back on her high school campus. And although she's a successful adult, she's kind of drawn back into her adolescent self. And her adolescent self was pretty withdrawn and a very literally backstage person. And this fear of like, well, I wasn't even friends with these people. What will they think if I, get involved? I wasn't, that was kind of the in crowd. What would they think of me? And so she has this hesitation for very, psychological reasoning that you could say, well, that doesn't make sense. But if we would all be, no one can let go of high school, of course, right?
Yeah, I mean, so there's that. And another aspect of this is, I think, like, I have just seen, in the last few years, I'm sure it's been going on longer than that, but it just seems like, when you get drawn into something on social media, you are at a high risk of your reputation being destroyed. I mean, and this is like a total Me Too phenomenon. I mean, just the general reticence of people coming forward sort of about anything. But I feel like Twitter and social media just exacerbates this entire problem. And it's cultural blood sport, and people go to Twitter for a kind of entertainment of one person wrecking the other person. They come there to hear black and white pronouncements of justice, you know, and I just, it's just so, in a way, I'm like, oh, it's so toxic. But then on the other hand, I'm like, well, everybody knows it's toxic. Like, that's not a glitch, it's a feature. Like, that's why it's there. Anyway, what do you think about just how awful social media can be for anybody who comes forward about anything?
Right. I mean, and that is a topic of the book, right? There's people getting, you know, some major Twitter, you know, would say a Twitter scandal, sort of, within the book. That's how I describe it. I mean, again, I don't have a thesis statement on it, right? It's just like, I know that when I find really mucky, messy, contradictory territory, that's something that I can write about. And I think that, you know, the novel gave me the chance to explore questions that it's very hard to explore on social media, where they often first arise. So there is this, you know, at the same time that Bodhi throughout the book is looking back on predatory teachers and, you know, what was essentially sexual assault in the hallways of her school, and with great anger, someone is mad at her ex-husband on Twitter and saying, like, this, you know, we dated way back, it was a predatory relationship because of the age gap between us, among other things. And Bodhi, you know, the reader might feel one way or the other. Bodhi as a character really feels like, no, like, these other things cross a line, that doesn't cross a line. Those are, you know, the nuances, though, of those conversations. There would be cases that could come up, like, say, Aziz Ansari is the classic one, right? That early in Me Too, where it's like, wait a second, this does not seem like these other things. But you can't come out and say that on Twitter, because then you're like in like however many characters, and then people are just going to attack you. So you have these conversations like offline. But the great thing about art, the novel, something that takes a long time, that is broad and big, it can contain contradictions. It can be about the gray area. It can get in there without having to come down on one side or another.
Yeah. All right, so there are a ton of questions from the audience already. Thank you, everybody. I see we have a really big crowd. I'm psyched to see you all there. Thank you. I will get to these questions at the end. I want to talk a little bit in this portion of the interview about your style and some of your approaches to structure, which are fascinating to me as a writer and kind of student of story. But first, let's just start with your style. I mean, the word that I love when people use about you is stylish. Like, this is you're a stylish writer. These are stylish books. And I think, why is that a great word? At least, why do I think that's apt? I think that you do so many interesting things, sort of from a kind of technical perspective, from like things that would be called literary, like a literary technique. And yet it's just always compulsively readable. And it's like always approachable. And it's never like a difficult text, right?
No, I would never want to write something that was like confusing.
That's right. And yet it's very like filled with like cool, interesting, fresh literary techniques. So that's why I think stylish is there. Do you feel like that's a good word for you, or?
Okay, sure. I mean, you should see the jeans I'm wearing that are like, like not stylish in other ways. I like that, though. And I maybe I like that better than literary, because literary, it's such a fraught word. Like, what I write is, the genre is literary fiction, right? But then you say that and it sounds like you're implying that other things are not literature or something, which is never what you know. So although I would never introduce myself, be like, I write stylish books. That's not not what what I would say. But if like, yes, you can call me stylish with my. Like,
I'm gonna do it so you don't have to. Okay. But so the thing that really jumped out at me, as far as, you know, I've heard you do a few interviews about this book, and what jumped out at me in some of these interviews is your attention to plot and story, and how you like to keep momentum going. And you always are afraid that your reader will get bored. And I want to get into some of your techniques about that. But I first want to say that I heard you tell some story about how you used to be a teacher of, you know, young kids, and like that was great training for you. And I would say, this is a story I might have told before on my show, but I love this story so much. It was like a formative moment for me as a storyteller myself. It's like, I have 4 kids, and when they were younger than they are now, I would tell them bedtime stories, and I would just sort of make them up every night, you know? And I remember one night, and you can just see it in their faces, right? Like there's like no filter. If they are bored, it's just like asleep, it's turning away, it's like yawning, whatever. I mean, just no filter, right? And I remember one time I was like saying to it was a bad story night. I was off my game, right? And I said to my daughter, who was like 6 at the time, she like gave me a consolation hug after, like, don't worry, like, it was a bad story, Dad. I'm like, well, tell me, like, what is exciting to you guys? What do you want? And she's like, Dad, in every story, somebody has to be fighting or falling in love. And like, I'm just like, oh,
brilliant.
Yeah, right? It's like, there it is.
That is like, yes. Oh my God. You could have told me that like Grace Paley said that or something, and I'd be like, yeah.
But you had that experience too, right? Like, I mean, like you see it in kids, like they tell you whether you're on it or not, right?
That's it. Yeah. I mean, and it was, sometimes I would tell them stories, but like it was often just, it was reading aloud to them, like E.B. White or whatever, and yeah, I mean, just, it's partly you can see it when they get bored. It's also that you get feedback when they do not understand.
Yeah.
And they just, because you ask them at the next day, you go, okay, who remembers what happened yesterday? And you kind of get this like reading comprehension group, thing going. And you're like, oh, you guys did not follow, or it's the kid who's not paying attention. And you're like, midway through, you're like, and so blah, 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 Mark, what do you think is going to happen next? Right. And Mark's like, so there's that, but it's not, it's not so much that I got like specific, oh, they like this, but they don't like this, so much as this ingrained fear of boring people. And I'm someone who is really easily bored, so maybe I had that anyway. And just a sense of like, I need to make sure that you understand me the whole time. And I need to draw you in. I need to I need to earn every time you turn the page. And that doesn't mean like, writing a thriller, but just, is there always a reason to keep going? Yeah.
And what do you think about the idea that, I think it's getting better now, but the idea that, in certain circles, certain MFA circles, certain kinds of circles, literary circles, story is sort of like the ugly stepchild of literature, and like language is sort of what it's about. I mean, I know you really care about story, but like, why is this a hard conversation to have? I mean, I've had personal experiences where I go into a workshop and I'm sort of critiquing somebody else's work, and I'm like, hey, I just don't think there's any antagonistic force here. I just don't, this character doesn't seem to want anything. Like, what's the goal? What's the goal of this scene? And it's like, sometimes people give you a look like, excuse me, but I mean, I don't mean to sound kind of like I'm like they're snobby, but I'm being snobby back to them about my thing. But it's just more like, I'm trying to square the circle. Like, why is it sort of not as popular? Yeah.
I think one thing is that it's hard to talk about structure and plot without sounding like you're advocating for formula. And there are a lot of like how to write a novel books that are very like, the villain must appear by page 30. I think are,
save the cat.
Bullshit, right. Yeah, the kind of save the cat, right. And then also it's like, you start talking about structure and people are like, well, isn't that Western hegemony? Like, okay, maybe, but storytelling actually works across cultures in some very similar ways. We can't just say all plot is something that's been inflicted, or like all plot is patriarchy or whatever. People get like these. So the thing is then so at my organization, Story Studio, Chicago, we get a lot of like, students of all levels, but we get a lot of post MFA students. And very often the reason they're coming and they're taking my novel class is they're like, I got an MFA and I thought I knew how to write. And now I'm sitting there trying to write a novel and no one ever taught me about plot and structure. And I'm desperate, please teach me. And that's so much of like what I love to talk about when I teach writing. I think people are coming around. I think more students are kind of almost demanding that in workshops, right? And yeah, hi Jane, I'm seeing Jane's comment here. If I want beautiful language, I read poetry. A novel's got to have a plot. Yeah. If your whole thing were like my sentences, then like, why is someone going to read you and not like, Wisława Szymborska or something
Right.
Right.
Like there is a non-story genre. It's called poetry.
Yes, right. Exactly. Yeah.
So one thing I'm interested in, Rebecca, is like, so you teach at 2 universities, you have this novel class, and so you've just said your students come to you and they want to learn about stories. So my question for you then is, what are your theories? Like, what are your methods? Do you have charts? Do you talk about this theorist, that theorist? I mean, like, give us an example of like how you talk about structure.
Well, the cat has to go missing by page 30.
And then, besides that, everybody knows that.
No. So yeah, I mean, for me, in my own writing, I do a lot of, I do outline, but it's mostly retroactive outlining. It's mostly like, you're just going to start writing, and then about, 100 pages in, if you get that, somewhere before 100 pages, let's say, you're going to hit a wall. Yep. And the wall does not mean you're a bad writer, and it does not mean it's a bad book, and it does not mean you have writer's block. The wall is you got to step back and switch over to some left brain thinking and think structurally and think architecturally. And whatever works for you, you draw it out, you map it out, whether that's drawing a plot arc or making a list of scenes or making a picture. Or my first novel, because I really didn't know what I was doing, the only outline I had originally was like a pie chart that was like the percentage of time I was spending in different parts of the book, but that was actually really useful. So whatever floats your boat, but stepping back and going, okay, what do I have here? And then what's working? What do I need to rebuild? How do I go ahead? And there are so many different ways to do that. It doesn't need to look like the outline you learned in 6th grade, like Roman numerals and capital letters. Like, it's not that kind of outline. But what's the big picture? And then at the same time, you're thinking about cause and effect. Like, what if you could shuffle your scenes into any random order, unless you're doing that on purpose because you're doing something really experimental, you've got a problem. You need to look at that. Like, every scene except the first one needs to be caused by something else within the world of the novel. And every scene except the last one needs to cause something else in the novel to happen. Maybe not every single one, of course, right? And like anyone who reads my work would say like, oh, but you have these floating sections and you have, so I don't mean that, literally every, but it helps to think that way. What caused this scene to happen? What is this scene going to cause to happen? And that's not the kind of thing you can figure out when you're looking at like this much text on your computer screen at a time. You have to step back, and it's note cards or it's, whatever. And you figure that stuff out.
I think, if I were teaching a class about how to write something that is literary stylish and, also keeps this kind of structure and momentum, I mean, like, I think I could do worse than putting your book forward and just like teaching your book, because I think one of the things that was so remarkable about this book to me was the way, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but you're able to use some of these techniques like interstitials and, I don't even know what you'd call some of these chapters. They're almost like little prose poems. And yet there is this forward lean to everything. And I guess to kind of drill down and just ask you one more question about how you teach, like if a storyteller came to you, a writer came to you and said, I'm having a lot of trouble with momentum in my book, keeping people turning the pages. And I feel like if I do that, I'm not really an artist. I'm like kind of going down the plot route and all that stuff. And you're somebody who is like creating great art and also just keeping the momentum going. What's your tip for that?
Yeah, for momentum, I mean, momentum is 99% of the time based in motivation and character motivation. So the counterintuitive thing for a lot of writers is you need to slow down, stop for gas. You've got to early on give us the interiority on your characters so that we know what they want or need or fear, so that we're with them as they go. And people are afraid to, they're afraid of being slow. They're afraid of things dragging. So they don't give their characters motivations and interiority. They don't have the time to do that. So then we're just watching a series of random actions and it does not actually have momentum.
Right.
So it's like, you're getting on the road for a really long road trip. Stop for gas first. Use the bathroom. It's going to be worth it in the long run. Because otherwise you're going to have a really big problem later on. And it doesn't mean that you start your first, your whole first chapter, someone gazing out the window, yearning or something. Please don't do that. But like along the way, are you pausing and letting us know what they're actually thinking and what they constantly keeping an eye on what they want or need or fear or weird combinations of those three? That is the fuel in your tank.
Right. Thank you for almost giving me my first ever live spit take on air. I'm not going to drink anything more the rest of this interview while you're talking. Okay, so look, we have so many questions from the audience. I'm actually going to wrap my questions a little bit early, and I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll get to the audience questions. But one of the best and most heartening things I heard you say on another interview was you just sort of laid out your theory about how all novels can be saved. And I just want every writer who's in this audience today, who's listening right now, to hear me repeat that all novels can be saved. Like Rebecca, you were explaining that you don't have a drawer novel, which is super interesting. And I think almost everybody does, but you don't. And I mean, I think it's connected to obviously this idea that you feel like anything with the proper amount of revision, structure, thought, outlining, whatever it may be, there's always a novel there. So you should never really give up. Is that fair?
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, the thing is, maybe you give up because you decide that you really want to do something else. That's fine, right? If you don't care about it anymore. But there is no such, unless it is something offensive, right? There is no such thing as a bad idea for a novel, right? So like, if someone's like, okay, I have this idea for a novel. This guy, his uncle killed his dad, and then the dad's ghost shows up and he's like, hey, avenge my death. But then he can't make up his mind, and then he gets poisoned. Is that a good idea for a play? Or what, yes, no, I don't know. Right. Try to like pitch someone, like try to pitch Frankenstein if it hadn't been written, be like, okay, so there's this doctor and he sews together a man from dead body parts, and then the monster has feelings, and then they end up chasing each other across icebergs. That's not a good idea for a novel.
But it's really a metaphor for losing a child after you give birth. I mean, like that. I mean,
yeah,
it's just,
I mean, sure, right? So it's, there's, you take any idea like that in the wrong hands or done sloppily or whatever, or someone gives up after draft 3 instead of after draft 900.
Yeah,
it doesn't work. But in the right hands or with the right number of drafts or with the right sweat, like it does work. And I just I do understand, like I think the time to give up on a novel for sure is if you just you are like divorced from the idea. You just don't connect to it anymore. It's not there for you. It's just like your heart's not in it. That's different, right?
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move into questions now. The great Caroline Levitt, co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, who should have been doing this interview, but she sadly got sick this week. But we're going to give her the honor of the first question here. I may not be able to speak, but I happily can still type questions. Rebecca, I loved your brilliant novel, and I wanted, by the way, Caroline, loves books more than I think anybody I've ever met. Aww. I mean, she's just so enthusiastic. You're such a champion of novelists and the arts, Caroline. So thank you always for doing that. Rebecca, I loved your brilliant novel, and I wanted to talk about the title. I thought the you who must answer questions posed isn't just a suspect, but the reader as well. Would you agree?
Yeah. So something we didn't talk about is that this book it's first person, but it's also directed at, so kind of thought at this second person character who's a kind of sketchy teacher at the school. Someone that's not there anymore, but that was problematically close to students in the 1990s. And yes, though, you is also the first word of the book. The first sentence is you've heard of her. There's definitely, once you've read the book, there is late in the book a chapter that starts with, I have some questions for you. And that you is explicitly Mr. Block, the sketchy music teacher. But no one picking up the book knows that yet. And so obviously, I knew in choosing that title, which was not the original title, long search for the title, it is putting it out there like, hey, you're implicated in all of this because you are a consumer of, true crime, fictional crime. Why are we all talking about this? What's your relationship to it? Let's think this through together. We're all implicated here.
And just one other kind of fanboy thing on the second person is there was a lot of second person in this, but it didn't, again, stylish, didn't seem gimmicky at all. It seemed completely organic and like perfectly intelligible from the jump. It's just yet another exhibit in this kind of way. You're able to kind of use all the tricks in the bag, but also just seem utterly readable at the same time. So that was a great thing about the book. All right. So Gabby, here we go. Question. Do you have any podcast or film experience yourself? Wondering why you chose to connect the main character Bodhi with those skills?
Yeah. I mean, I've been on a lot of podcasts, right? Like this is how you promote a book, but no, I don't have my own. Film. This is funny. So Bodhi is like really knows her film stuff. I don't. I had to do a lot of research to figure out the kind of things she'd be talking about. I did a lot of, educating myself. It wasn't just research. It was like watching multi-part documentaries about the history of film and things like that. But I wish I were like a major film buff, and I'm just, first I was so busy teaching, and then I had kids, and so you end up watching kid movies, and then now we're living in this golden age of TV, and that's a little easier when you're exhausted. So I'm terrible. But I do think so. In terms of, I'll talk really quickly. I had a long time of figuring out what her job would be, and I really liked this idea of her job. Her podcast. It's called Starlit Fever, which I didn't name. Someone on Twitter did when I was stuck for a name, and so I can say that I love that name because it's not mine. But the idea is that she is looking back on stories of the abuses of women by the Hollywood studio system in the early 20th century, and looking at these cases that, like, you think who Rita Hayworth was, but the real story is actually something else, and the real story is about systemic problems and much bigger picture. And so she's someone who's able to think that way to begin with. It's much harder for her then to apply that same kind of systemic thinking to this case with people she knew, but she gets there.
All right. So this is from, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Kathy or Kath Landberg. The book is about so much more than a story about murder and sleuthing. It's Bodhi's story, past and present. She's so well developed. What influenced her creation?
Yeah. So I am not one of those writers who starts with character. I know so many people do, and they're like, this character just came and started talking to me. Like, that sounds great, but that never happens to me. I really start with plot, scenario, setting, all that stuff. And then I kind of reverse engineer my characters. I'm thinking about what kind of character is going to be the most vulnerable to the circumstance. What kind of character is going to be changed the most by what happens? So what's their Achilles heel? What's going on in their life? What are the things that would destabilize them? And then I'm going to work with those rather than, I think what a lot of people do is start with a character and then think, okay, now what kind of trouble would this person get into? But I've been saying this on other places too. There's this really fun thing you can do of just like take a story and put the wrong character in the main role. Like, right. Like, so we were just saying Hamlet, like put Romeo into the plot of Hamlet, and Romeo's just like, okay, I'm gonna solve this, and like goes, he's gonna like go and handle it, and put Hamlet into the plot of Romeo and Juliet, and Hamlet's gonna be like, well, like we could, I don't know, should we be together or not? Like, right? And like those stories don't work. You need the person who is gonna be the most susceptible to that set of circumstances.
I've heard that same thing, but said about Macbeth and Hamlet, and like Hamlet would have thoughtfully solved like Macbeth's problem, and Macbeth just would have been like, "Okay, who do I kill?"
Totally. That is a better example. I love it.
And I found like, and just in my own writing with that very issue, I have found that sort of plot and character develop together, and that like I sort of like want them to have that exact tension that you're talking about, and I sort of like change the character based on where the plot is going, and change the plot based on who the character is. Just I'm always thinking about how can I make the character weak in just the wrong way, like for that story. So I just love how you framed that. All right, so let's keep going here. Whitney Scherer, the great author Whitney Scherer, her book came out recently, The Age of Light. Question, I have read your new novel. I have not read your new novel yet, though I love The Great Believers. There's a lot of that in the chat, by the way, a lot of Great Believer love. I keep seeing it compared to The Secret History. Was that novel a touchstone for you? And if not, what novels inspired you while you were writing?
Yeah, it's really funny. So I love The Secret History, but no, it's not. I think any comparisons there are kind of superficial. I get it. It's a campus novel, although that one is about college. People always forget. And I mean, probably Whitney didn't, but like people are like, oh, my favorite boarding school novel is The Secret History. It's about Bennington College. And I guess, that there is a murder, although it's not something that needs to be solved in The Secret History. It's like this, people get out of control. I take it as a huge compliment because it's a great book. I just don't think it's like in the same, like, what I'll totally take and be so happy is like someone goes into a bookstore and goes, I loved The Secret History. What should I read next? Then, yeah. But no, I looked back at certain boarding school novels actually that I do know and some of them love. I looked back at, A Separate Piece, which is kind of the OG. And I had read that in high school and I loved it in high school. And then it kind of fell flat for me in a lot of ways more recently, but it's still a touchstone.
I'm just so curious about that. Can you tell me, just give me one reason, why did it fall flat?
Part of it was the language, actually. There were some like really clunky sentences in there. And then I think it's just a product of when it was written. He like approaches this kind of homoerotic tendency, but then it's like it doesn't quite go there, and it seems like it seems unaware of itself in that way, perhaps. And then it's just very heavy-handed in its symbolism, like, oh, the fall from the tree, and we are no longer innocent now that of the fall because of the fall with the tree. Oh, okay. Got it. But there are others, I love Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld. So I was thinking about that. I don't read a ton of mystery, actually. I watch more mystery, I think, than I read, just because there is mystery out there like Tana French, who I love, that is really character driven, really chewy stuff. But of course, most mystery, I'd say the majority of mystery novels out there are intentionally genre mystery that are kind of, one of a long series and things like that. And it's just not what I'm drawn to read. But I did think about Tana French for sure, and just the kind of the way she reveals information, stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. That was great. All right, we'll just take one more from the audience, from Renee. Rebecca, how do you come up with the ideas for your stories?
Many different ways. There's no, it's a very nice question, and I've never been able to answer that question. It's not like a certain, I don't do a certain thing or go to a certain place, or so, in this particular case, I can answer, so many different tributaries. I live on the campus of the boarding school where my husband teaches. That's one thread. It's thinking a whole lot about our relationship to true crime. That's a thread. Thinking about Me Too and looking back on my adolescence in the 1990s and going, oh my God, I can't believe we were okay with that. And that's a thread. But things just kind of snowball.
Yeah. Which is interesting to put that answer together with the fact that you don't have any drawer novels and you believe all novels can be saved. I mean, what I draw from that is that you never write for the market. Your writing is always coming from a kind of an organic place. It's just kind of coming to you naturally, rather than, forcing yourself to write something. But it just all sounds so natural. Like, kind of your ideas come to you naturally. You don't give up on them. They all get published. It sounds great, honestly.
It's so easy.
It's so easy.
No, I mean, I think interestingly, I think the snowballing and the bringing together of a lot of things is a lot of the reason that I don't have desk drawer novels, because I just I wait until it's not just one idea. It's like a whole bunch of things. And I can roll, like, if I had some idea for a story once that didn't work quite, I can like kind of put that in there too. And I'm waiting until it's enough things, it starts to roll downhill. And then if there's part of that doesn't work, it goes. But I'm not hitching everything on one idea. I'm kind of writing about all the things that obsess me. Not all, but like a lot of different things that obsess me at a certain point in time. And that can go any number of ways. I'm not committed to like one vision of it.
And are you committed to a new project now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not getting a lot written because, anyone watching here, this is a hotel bed in Seattle, in the middle of an 18-day stretch with one suitcase. But I'm researching. And this is a project that actually really scares me. This new one, just several things that I've never done before, and a topic that might be off-putting to some people. But I'm pretty locked in to what that's going to be, and again, like determined. It's I think I might try multiple approaches. I'm not sure. I feel like I'm in this early stage. I feel like I'm like circling like some huge boulder, trying to figure out the best way to pick it up. And I'm just walking around it like, what am I? And I might try one way to pick it up. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to try another way to pick it up, and so on. So it's like finding the right approach to the idea rather than worrying about whether it's the right idea.
I feel like a lot of writers make that sound you just made. Just looking at what I wrote yesterday.
Yeah. Right. Like, how am I gonna? Yeah.
Well, all right. It sounds amazing, and I'm sure it's going to work out. But we're going to wrap here, Rebecca. And I always have one question that I ask to end every interview, which is that just imagine, if you will, the perfect reader for this book. Just the person who is just picking up everything you're putting down and catching all the references and just receiving the book in just the ideal way, which you wished it would be received. And this person has finished the book, and they're sitting there and they look out the window. Describe in a phrase or even a word, what is the feeling that this reader has?
Bewildered retrospect, by which I mean looking back at their own adolescence, whenever that was, and thinking about what's changed, which, is all kind of trippy for anyone to think about, thinking about what they put up with that they shouldn't have, thinking about what systems they were part of wittingly or unwittingly that might have harmed other people, thinking about things they participated in or were bystanders to, and thinking about what it means to evolve as a person, but still have the core there always of who you were.
Wow. At the risk of pushing a little bit further on that amazing answer, let's imagine that somebody looks back and sees these systems and is not, and identifies things that they're not happy about the way they behaved or things they remembered. What would you recommend people do with those feelings? What's the next step once you see that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what that is, right? Like, is there someone you need to apologize to? That would be one thing, right? Like, I think I would imagine that, especially in the age of Me Too, we have a lot of, especially men, looking back and going, oh my God. And it might matter more than you think to reach out to someone that you were even just casually harassful toward. That's not a word, let alone something more. But that could go for all of us, for all kinds of different things. And I don't know. I think it's something to be aware of. It's something to, to understand we're all working on understanding our privileges. And part of that work is to look back on the systems that supported us, whether that was educational or national or familial or racial or gender, all those systems, and understand that not everyone has those same systems, understand the work we all need to do to even the playing field in so many different ways. And doesn't mean that you're a bad person because you had a supportive family, or because English is your native language, or because you're able-bodied, or whatever it is. But just knowing that, and that same work that we're all trying to do as a society, it's a mindset that's going to help everybody. And we could get there, I think, through art. I don't think we don't have to get there through like a training program at your workplace, which can be really painful. Like, let's all write down 5 things. I think you can get there through art. And I've certainly gotten there through art, through my own writing, just, that like real excavation looking back.
Amazing. What a place to end. Standing O, the virtual
You're
crowd.
Sitting, man. I'm kidding. Don't lie to me. I can see you.
This is a standing desk, Rebecca.
Oh,
no, it's not. All right. Anyway, folks, please, we put the link in the chat many times. Please buy. I have some questions for you by Rebecca Makkai. You will not be disappointed. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people have bought this book already, but they can't be wrong.
I'm sure it's hundreds of thousands, but let's say yes. That would be great.
But Rebecca, I know you are just so busy. You're sort of in between things today, and I know you're hosting a party tonight. So thank you just for carving out a little bit of time for us here on A Mighty Blaze. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Great. All right, folks. We'll see you next week on Friday Frontliner, and I will be back soon with more episodes of The Thoughtful Bro. Thanks again for joining, everybody.